and the Greeks. But in modern history, Locke was a pioneer. Okay, according to Locke, according to the classical liberal view, fundamental human rights, and we'll see what that means in a minute, are logically prior to government. Rights do not come from government. Rights come from God, if you want to look at it that way, or rights come from the nature of being human, if you want to look at it that way. Either way, rights do not come from government. They are prior to government. First come the rights. Only then do we worry about writing constitutions and passing laws. And the purpose of the Constitution, speaking now about the American Constitution, the purpose of the Constitution was specifically to protect rights. And the founders, Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, which is not the Constitution, of course, but in the Declaration of Independence, and the other founders, Madison and company, they were very, very clear in just about everything that they wrote, that they weren't creating rights. Rather, they were trying to see to it that people's rights that are inherent in the core of their being would be protected against trespass. And that's what government is for. At least according to the classical liberal view, government exists to protect the rights, the natural, fundamental human rights that exist prior to government. Government doesn't exist to create rights. And of course, this notion of government protecting everybody's individual rights was a justification for what came to be called in the literature, political philosophy literature, the classical night watchman state. The protective functions of the state. Immanuel Kant. Now I slipped one in on you there because I use the term very quickly, fundamental human rights. What does that mean? Well, Kant helps us with that. First, he notes that to be a genuine human right, it must be, and of course, Kant wrote in German. And this is an English translation, which probably isn't a real word for all I know about, but it's an English translation of the German. They must be generalizable, meaning that any right that I claim for myself has to be a right that you also have in exactly the same way as I do. And I have to be able to exercise that right, and you have to be able to exercise that right without logical contradiction with each other. Generalizable, applicable to all in the same sense. So if I'm claiming a right to do something, I'm person A and I claim a right to do X, everybody has to have that same right in the same way. Else there'll be a logical contradiction. If I claim a right for myself, and I say you don't have a right, that same right, then it's a Baird right. It's not a human right. To be human, it has to apply to all humans. That's the meaning of generalizable. So let's look at some rights and duties. Any claim by a person to have a right is a claim that logically has to impose a duty on somebody. But the duty can be negative. That is, the duty is that somebody else doesn't do something. Or the duty can be positive. My rights claim imposes a duty on you to perform some act, to provide some benefit to me. It is only those rights claims that impose negative duties, duties on other people not to do something, it is only those right claims that in fact are generalizable. Why? Because human rights must be for all. Only these negative rights are generalizable. Examples. Is there a right to a job? Does any human being have a right to a job in the sense that that person is guaranteed to have a job no matter what? Not in the Kantian sense. Not in the fundamental human rights sense, because that's not generalizable. If I have a right to a job, somebody has a duty to take a positive action to provide the job to me. So that can't be a human right. Right to a job in that sense. But there is a sense in which there is a right to a job that is universal, that is a fundamental human right. I have a right to offer and buy labor services. You have a right to offer to buy and sell labor services. That's the same right. We can all have it. We can all exercise it at the same time. To make offers to other people, to buy, to sell. And nothing happens. You don't have a right to have anything happen unless the other person consents, right? Unless the other person accepts the offer. That's the only sense in which there is the fundamental human right to a job. It's to make offers with respect to employment, whether you're a buyer or seller of labor services. How about a right to, do people have a right to food? Well, if by right to food you mean that a person has a right to have a biologically or physiologically adequate diet to consume, no matter what, there is no such human right. Because whoever claims that right is imposing a duty on somebody else to take a positive action, to provide, without consent, to provide. How about medical care? Boy, listen to the politicians on medical care. We all have a right to medical care. What does that mean? Well, I claim, just like as with food, we all have a right to make offers to buy and sell medical services, to buy and sell food. Doesn't put any obligation onto anybody else to do anything, just an offer. But if the consent is forthcoming, then the deal is made. Now, there's a little bit of a caution here. It's a semantic trap. Philosophers talk about these two rights claims as positive rights and negative rights. The problem with that is that the word positive to most people means something that is desirable, right? It's positive. What a negative person that is, right? Negative is generally something that is considered to be undesirable. And here I am suggesting that fundamental human rights are all negative. Right? Meaning that they put a duty on other people not to do something. So I have a little vocabulary suggestion here. How many economics students do we have here? Any economics students? Okay, well, in economics there is something called a public good. And there are two characteristics of a public good. One of them is that it is possible for all people to consume the public good at the same time without anybody's consumption imposing any less available to someone else. We call that non-rivalrous consumption. Say if I have an apple, if I bite the apple, that piece that I got in my mouth, you can't have in your mouth, right? But if there's let's say there's an earthquake in California, and California falls into the Pacific Ocean. It's a good thought.